Bad Times at the El Royale is a neo-noir mystery thriller directed by Drew Goddard. So the movie starts with a guy showing up at the El Royale hotel, and when he gets in his room, he immediately starts doing some pretty heavy-duty spring cleaning. And while he's at it, he decides to stash his luggage underneath the floorboards. Once he's done putting his room back together, he gets a knock at the door from somebody who must be his chiropractor, because when he invites him inside, the guy proceeds to give him a spinal adjustment with a shotgun. 10 years later, we find Catholic priest Daniel Flynn standing outside that same hotel, seemingly a bit lost. But luckily, soul singer Darlene Sweet also happens to be checking in and guides him inside, where they meet flamboyant appliance salesman Laramie Seymour Sullivan, who, while waiting for the innkeeper to show up, informs them that the El Royale was once popular with the uber-wealthy until losing its gambling license a few years ago. Darlene eventually manages to wake up the bellboy, Miles Miller, who comes out and is surprised to see Father Flynn and immediately warns him that this hotel is no place for a priest. But Padre says it's cool and then proceeds to struggle to choose a room, so he flips a coin and decides to go with room 4. Darlene decides to take room 5, and while the rest of them are checking in, a car comes flying into the parking lot like a bat out of hell, and a bitchy hippie girl hops out and proceeds to check herself in under the name Fuck You. Once everybody's checked in, Laramie immediately starts tearing apart his room and finds a buttload of wiretaps. So he decides to do some snooping around, and besides finding the bellboy passed out with a heroin needle in his arm, he also discovers a secret corridor where every room can be observed through two-way mirrors and even sees a camera set up in front of one of the windows. While taking a peek through some of the windows, Laramie sees Darlene singing, Father Flynn ripping up the floorboards, and Fuck You dragging an unconscious girl out of the trunk of her car and tying her up while holding a shotgun. So Laramie heads out to the parking lot and calls into the FBI, revealing himself to actually be Special Agent Dwight Broadbeck, where he's then instructed by the one and only J. Edgar Hoover to focus on his mission of retrieving the surveillance equipment that the FBI had planted throughout the hotel and ignore the apparent kidnapping. When Dwight tells Hoover about the other wiretaps he found in his room, Hoovdog believes their mission may have been compromised and tells Dwight to prevent the other guests from leaving. So Dwight proceeds to pull the spark plug wires out of everybody's cars. Back in the room, Fuck You tells the girl that she can't untie her just yet and says that she understands she's probably pretty peeved about the whole being locked in the trunk and tied up thing, but once she gets her head clear, they can talk it out. It's then revealed that the girl is actually her sister and that Fuck You is just trying to keep her away from some guy named Billy Lee who looks an awful lot like Thor with a bad mustache and happens to be the leader of a violent cult of gun-toting hippies. Meanwhile, Father Flynn heads over to Darlene's room, and after complimenting her singing, he invites her to join him for dinner in the hotel lounge. There, Darlene explains that she's practicing for a performance in Reno, and Father Flynn reveals that his noggin seems to be on the fritz these days, and that sometimes he has trouble remembering where he is or even who he is. And after that depressing revelation, he goes to mix them up some drinks, but Darlene sees him trying to spike her, so she proceeds to give him some extra memory problems by smashing a bottle over his head. The heroin-head bellboy Miles later finds him and helps him up, and Father Flynn tells him that he just fell down because he's old, and that's just kinda what old people do. He asks Miles to fix him a drink, and after getting it for him, Miles figures this would be a perfect time to ask if he could confess his sins. Padre's all like, not now, kid, and asks if he's got a master key for the hotel, since apparently he locked himself out of his room, which he claims is another fun side effect of being old. So Miles goes looking for the master key, but when he can't find it, he heads to a back room, and when Father Flynn asks him where he's going, he says that he warned him that this wasn't a good place. He leads Padre down the secret corridor, but Father Flynn doesn't really appreciate being spied on, and just as he's about to do some unholy things to him, Miles says that he didn't spy on him and claims that he only watches who management tells him to watch. He explains that when high-profile guests would stay at the hotel, sometimes he would get a call from management telling him to set up a camera and get film of them screwing, and claims that it hasn't happened much since the election. Father Flynn asks him if he ever kept any of the film, and Miles admits that when a now-deceased, super-famous guy stayed there, he was the only person that was ever nice to him, so he felt guilty and kept the film. So Flynn gets Miles to tell him where the film is, and while Padre's going to check it out, Miles notices a pretty sketchy situation unfolding in Fuck You's room, where apparently Agent Broadbeck decided to defy his orders not to interfere with the kidnapping and proceeds to bust in and attempt to rescue Rose. But it doesn't exactly go as he planned, and he winds up catching a load of buckshot in the face. And when Fuck You takes a peek through the hole in the mirror, she discovers the secret corridor and a wounded Miles who appears to be having some face full of buckshot problems of his own. A little while earlier, after bottling Father Flynn, Darlene makes a run for it outside, where she stumbles across Agent Broadbeck pulling the spark plug wires out of everybody's cars. So she keeps an eye on him and then witnesses fuck you blowing him away and going to check out the secret corridor behind the mirror. And while she's taking a look around back there, Darlene sees Rosie taking the opportunity to give Billy Lee a call and tell him where her sister carted her off to, and says that she'll see him soon before hanging up the phone and going to join her sister in the corridor. So while the coast is clear, Darlene takes the opportunity to grab the wires and Broadbeck's gun, and after putting the wire back in her car, she tries to leave but can't, since she's apparently a better singer than she is a mechanic. Just then, Father Flynn knocks on her window and hops in her car to have a little chat, where he reveals that he's not actually a priest, but is actually a thief named Doc O'Kelly who just got out of prison after doing 10 years for a bank robbery in 1959. He tells her he decided to disguise himself as a priest to avoid people asking too many questions, and that the reason he was trying to spike her drink was so that he could get into her room to retrieve the money hidden under the floorboards by his brother 10 years earlier, since he accidentally chose the wrong room when he first arrived on account of his brain turning to mush, so he offers to split the cash with her if she helps him to get it. So while Darlene practices her yodeling in front of the mirror to cause a distraction, Doc gets to work pulling up the floorboards under the bed and finds the money. Meanwhile, Fuck You and Rosie tie up what's left of Miles, and Fuck asks him what's up with the secret corridor behind the mirror. He's all like, I don't know, I just work here, and begs her not to kill him since he's seen worse things at the hotel than what they did and he doesn't even know their names. So just then, Rosie decides to chime in while swinging from the chandelier like a monkey and introduces herself as Rosie Summerspring and reveals that her sister's name isn't actually Fuck You, it's Emily. So Emily's now pretty damn sure that they're gonna have to kill him, and as Miles pleads with her to just let him confess his sins to the priest before they do it, Rosie pipes up again and says that it's not up to them to decide if they kill him or not. And realizing what her sister has done, Emily asks her who it is up to. And right on cue, a barefoot Billy Lee comes strolling into town and rounds everybody up. We then cut to a flashback where Billy Lee gives his cult a little speech about how in society regular people are forced to choose sides while the guys at the top steal from them as they fight amongst themselves. So as an allegory, he gets Rose to fight another girl for a chance to sleep with him, and while they're fighting, he goes in the girl's bag and grabs himself a smoke. Meanwhile, back in the present, Billy has everybody tied up around the roulette table and dumps out the bag of money and proceeds to interrogate the group about it while Rosie watches and munches on a slice of pie. Darlene tells him that it's her money and she made it singing. He asks Miles what's up with the hotel, but he can't really answer on account of his mouth being tied shut. So Doc answers for him and tells Billy that it's some kind of pervy hotel that secretly films famous folks while they're screwing. So Billy takes a closer look at the roll of film and realizes that it's actually more valuable than the money. Now, just a little side note here, we never actually get to see who's on the film, but if you put two and two together, it's pretty obvious that it's JFK. Anyway, after doing a bit of belly dancing and still kind of peeved about the whole Emily running off with Rose thing, he forces Emily to choose a color in a game of roulette between her and Miles. And while the wheel's spinning, Miles starts frantically trying to confess his sins to Doc, but Billy proceeds to burst his bubble and tell him that he's not actually a priest. But it's actually Emily that comes up short in Billy's little game, so he proceeds to poke her in the boob with a bullet. After the game, everybody's feeling a little more honest, so when Billy asks them again where the money came from, Doc does some confessing of his own and tells him that he stole it. Billy asks him what his real name is, just in case he wants to double-check his story later, but Doc has another one of his little memory lapses and can't seem to remember who he really is. Darlene explains that Doc's brain ain't really firing at 100% these days, and he genuinely can't remember his real name. But Billy Boy ain't buying it and tries to jog his memory with another round of roulette. But before the wheel comes to a stop, Doc headbutts him and breaks free and starts kicking his ass while inadvertently setting the place on fire. Darlene sees a gun on the floor and asks Miles to give them a hand, but Miles says that he can't kill any more people. Confused, Darlene asks him how many people he's killed, and Miles says 123. It's then revealed that mild-mannered Miles Miller was actually a sniper back in Nam and racked himself up a pretty impressive body count. So Darlene tells him that it's okay and he doesn't have to kill anyone else. Meanwhile, Billy has gotten the upper hand on Doc and is just about to jog his memory with some buckshot when all of a sudden Miles decides to up his kill count to an even 130 and proceeds to take out Billy and his whole crew of dirty hippies. But when he goes over to comfort a weepy Rose, who's more busted up about her cult leader boyfriend than her own sister for some reason, Rosie turns around and gives him a knife-induced tummyache. So Doc finally puts the little twerp out of her misery. Darlene runs over to Miles and tells Doc to help him. But Doc takes one look at Miles' leaky guts and says, yeah, no can do, honey. But Darlene's all like, no, you big dummy, I mean help him. And Doc looks at her all like, oh, gotcha, and proceeds to put on the whole priest act again and allows Miles to confess his sins before he dies. They then go collect the money and Darlene chucks the JFK sex tape in the fire before leaving the hotel and going their separate ways. A little while later, we check in with Darlene, who's performing at a nightclub in Reno. And when she looks out into the audience, she sees that old Doc showed up to hear her sing just like he said he would during dinner back at the hotel.